Wait for the beginning. What is that song? Every new beginning is every. It's something.
Every new beginning is another beginning's end, I think.
That's it. That's it.
Is that a They Might Be Giants line? Oh, what's that from?
It's a
Yes, I think so.
I could totally hear them singing that. Yeah.
Isn't that experimental film by They Might Be Giants?
It might be. But we're ready to start in 3, 2. This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 636, recorded on Wednesday, September 13th, 2017. Every ending is a new beginning. Hey everyone, I am Dr. Kiki, and tonight we are going to fill your heads with a Viking warrior, colorful cephalopods, and the death of a spacecraft. But first...
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. There is more to the world you live in than the world you are living on. There are things aplenty to occupy your time with here, it's true. And much can be learned about the nature of stuff and the complicated organization of reality without ever looking up. But there is much more going on that can be answered if we do. Up there, over there, way, way, way out there, the rest of the universe is waiting to be explored. And thankfully, some of us are up to the task. We reach for new heights and reveal the unknown for the benefit of humankind. That is the vision statement of NASA. As they lift their gaze to those new heights, they lift all of ours, freely sharing what is learned. And at the same time, they have been looking back, constantly looking back, revealing the unknowns here on Earth as well. And if revealing the unknown here on Earth or elsewhere is something that you're into, you have landed at the right location, because it's now time for This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki, Blair.
And good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back, and what a week it is. So many things, so many stories, and we have a wonderful conversation to have tonight. I'm so excited about the show ahead. I have stories about water on the moon, some bad headlines this week in science. Oh, science headline writers and science writers, what have you done? I've also got squirrel chunking, and we are joined by Emily Lakdawalla from the Planetary Society to talk about Cassini. So very excited to have her on the show. We'll introduce her more in just a moment. Justin, what did you bring?
I've got Viking games and embedded connectivity.
Embedded. Nice. All right. And Blair, what is the animal corner holding in store for us?
I brought a couple of old staples to the corner today. I brought some very scintillating, interesting, confusing, fascinating invertebrate sex. And I also brought a little something for the cephalenthusiasts.
That's cephal wonderful.
Yeah. Cephal exciting.
Cephal exciting. So cephal exciting. Oh my goodness. And everyone, as we move into our show, I want to remind everyone that you can subscribe to the TWIS podcast on iTunes, in the Google Play podcast portal, in Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn. We're on YouTube and Facebook, and you can also just search for us in all these places by looking for This Week in Science. Visit twis.org for all sorts of show note information and links. But now it's time for a segment we like to call What Has Science Done For Me Lately? This week, Tina Penman writes in and says, "Hi there. My name is Tina Penman, and I met you at the Science Communication Conference in January. Thanks for TWIS. I started listening to the podcasts last week, and I really enjoy them so far. I hope you keep enjoying them, Tina. Here's what science has done for me. A couple weekends ago, I completed the 2017 Seattle to Portland bike ride with my friends Anna Dietich and Nathan Pearson, 203 miles in 2 days.
Wow.
If it weren't for the inventors of the bicycle, which is up for a debate, by the way, and science, I would not have been able to pedal on an actual bike from Seattle to Portland. If it weren't for the gears on my bike, I would not have been able to climb the rolling hills and glide back down at full speed using gravity to my advantage. If it weren't for my understanding of physics and pace lines, I would have been trudging into the wind at 15 to 18 miles per hour out in the open by myself. If it weren't for our understanding of food, nutrition, and the impact it has on energy levels, we may have improperly refueled during the long ride. Thanks to science, we were able to conquer the ride together. Ride on."
Nice.
Tina Penman, Portland, Oregon.
Nice.
Yeah, so true. The bicycle and our ability to do these amazing races. I mean, that's a double century, right? 203
Yeah.
miles, 2 days.
It's crazy.
I'm lucky if I go like 2 miles. I'm just lucky. Tina, thank you so much for writing in. And everyone out there, remember, we need you to write in. Thank you, those of you who have. I can't wait to read your letters to everyone. And I just want to keep scheduling them. Keep them coming. Leave us a message on our Facebook page, facebook.com/thisweekinscience. We want to fill this segment of the show with something from our Minion community every week of the year. So you need to write us, please. And now let's move into the big conversation of the week. If you have been on Twitter this week or Facebook as well, there is so much conversation about this final week in the life of the Cassini spacecraft mission. And to join us tonight is Emily Lakdawalla. She's the senior editor and planetary evangelist for the Planetary Society. And we are thrilled to have you back on the show. Emily, thank you so much for joining us once again to talk about Cassini.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I think the last time you were on, we were talking about the New Horizons mission.
Quite likely.
Yeah. A while back, and there's been all sorts of, I mean, we've moved past Pluto and we've learned so much about Pluto from New Horizons, and New Horizons is off going out to other outer solar system bodies. But the Cassini mission, can you give us a little history of the Cassini mission?
Sure. You know, it's actually a good time to do that because everybody who I've been with at the press room at JPL today has just been reflecting about Cassini. It's been such a long mission that everybody has is measuring their lives by the length of Cassini. There are some people who are around for the protests around its launch in 1997. Because it was nuclear powered and people were worried about a launch accident causing a problem. And I could launch into a 30-minute explanation of why a launch accident is not going to contaminate the world of plutonium, but that's probably not what you want me to use this time for. But anyway, it launched in 1997. It flew this long circuitous path in order to get to Saturn, but it finally arrived in 2004. And actually, when Cassini arrived at Saturn, that was my first professional beat as a science reporter.
Wow.
Was writing about the Cassini mission. It went into orbit. It's orbited Saturn hundreds of times. And on each of those orbits, it may fly past moons or get way up above the rings in order to look down and see the dynamics of the rings. It's gone behind Saturn to see Saturn block the sun, and you can see the sunlight shining through Saturn's atmosphere. It's watched bright stars pass behind the rings. It's used radar to penetrate the hazy atmosphere of Titan. It discovered geysers coming out of the South Pole of Enceladus. And it's done all of that for 13 years. So it's actually watched Saturn go through 3 seasons. It arrived when it was summer at Saturn's southern hemisphere, and we've seen it go through equinox, and we've seen summer arrive in the northern hemisphere. So we've seen everything change over time too. So it's just been a tremendous, lengthy mission, revolutionizing our understanding of Saturn, and just made it a place, it and all of its moons really helped us understand these things in ways we never did before.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for me was hearing Carolyn Porco talk about Cassini when some of the first images came back of Saturn. And we had images from the Voyager mission, but there was something different about these images from Cassini. Can you talk a little bit about what the images have brought us?
Well, I think there's 2 really important ways in which the images have been different between Voyager and Cassini. One of them is that Voyager's cameras were television cameras. There were these analog instruments. They were a little blurry. They were distorted. And they were not very fast. So when you wanted to take pictures, they had to have these longer exposures. Often they were blurred. In order to get color pictures, you have to take 3 images in a row through different color filters. And if you can't do that really fast, then things move in between. So everything is a little fuzzy. That it gives it that 70s feel, that everything's not quite at the highest possible resolution. Cassini's cameras are so crisp. And Cassini is such a stable platform from which to take photos that the images have this HD quality compared to Voyager. They're still actually only barely HD. The detector is only 1024 pixels square. It's a 1 megapixel camera. And the thing you've got in your phone is way higher resolution than that.
Wow. Yeah.
So in order to get lots of pixels in a Cassini picture, you actually have to do mosaics where you go ka-ching, 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 take all these like little footprints and puzzle piece them all together. But still, the pictures are so crisp. They make you really feel like you're right there. So that's one thing. The second thing that's made it different is that, you know, Voyager did the best that they could with the technology that they had to share all their images with the public as quickly as possible. There were TV monitors in various places in JPL and other locations where you could actually see the images arriving from Jupiter and Saturn as they hit the ground, but not very many people had access to that.
Right.
And so you could like sign up to get a newsletter from JPL delivered to you once a month that would have really badly photocopied versions of those images. And that was really the best thing you could do. And so nowadays, I mean, before Cassini arrived, they made the decision to share all of these images on the web immediately so that people like me who have nothing whatever to do with the mission except that I'm a fan can just go download them, make the color pictures, make animations, make mosaics, and can really experience everything in the same kind of wow, that's awesome, brand new thing from Saturn wonder that the science team gets to do. So that's, both of those things have made Cassini just a different experience from Voyager.
Yeah, I can't imagine where, you know, we know with Cassini and its technology level, it's always like, what is it, like 10 years behind at least?
It's 1980s technology, really, because it was launched in 1997, you have to realize. And so and anything that's been space hardened is much older than that. It's typically about a decade old by the time you get to launch. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's old school.
Super old school. And so as we look to the future, things will get better. Our images for our own solar system will get better, but it's so hard to even believe that we can do better than this amazing view we've had of Saturn and its moons. You mentioned earlier the jets that were discovered from Enceladus. I just would love to talk about that discovery for a minute. That was just huge.
So there was an idea before Cassini got there that Enceladus there might be something funky going on at Enceladus. And the reason that idea existed is because Enceladus was embedded in this thing called the E-ring, which was this kind of fuzzy ring. It was much more vertically extended than Saturn's other rings, much larger, and seemed to be densest right around the orbit of Enceladus. So that made people think there might be something a little weird about Enceladus. But it wasn't until one of the early orbits of the Cassini mission when they shot some photos of Enceladus that looked at its night side. And they saw this little fuzz along the edge. And they said, is that something erupting from Enceladus? Or, well, no, maybe it's just like an imaging artifact. It's like internal reflections in the camera. I'm not really sure. So they sequenced another set of images where they did the same thing. They looked at Enceladus from the night side, but they did something special. They rotated the spacecraft like 20 degrees and took another picture, and rotated it 20 degrees and took another picture, and did that again and again to make sure that it wasn't an artifact in the camera. And sure enough, those geysers just spun around, those plumes spun around as they took those pictures, and they said, aha, yes, this really is a feature on Enceladus. There really is something erupting from its south pole. And they flew closer, they got better pictures, they saw that there were multiple plumes. They took lots of pictures at lots of different times. They saw that the plumes were erupting continuously. They did more observations where they used a different instrument, not the camera, but something called a composite infrared spectrometer, which can detect thermal radiation coming off of Enceladus. And they saw that the cracks on Enceladus' south pole were hotter than the areas around it. So they said, aha, there really could be liquid water close to the surface here because the temperature is so high. And later on in the mission, they actually flew Cassini and its mass spectrometer within 25 kilometers of the surface of Enceladus, 25,000 meters, only 75,000 feet above the surface of Enceladus. So, there are airplanes, commercial airplanes don't fly at that altitude, but there are airplanes on Earth that fly at that altitude. And that's how close they got. And they were able to scoop up the stuff that was being spewed out of Enceladus. They learned that it was salty. So we're talking about an ocean, or at least a sea. I think the jury's still out on whether we're talking about a global layer of water around Enceladus, or if there's a perched sort of blob of water around the South Pole. I think it's leaning toward the global ocean, but I'm not totally sure about that. But yeah, so we've got this world that is spewing a saltwater ocean out into space where it's just easy to fly right through it and sample it. It's pretty awesome.
I think it's amazing. And in Enceladus, I mean, the idea that there could be places in our solar system where life could exist, the idea that we found this either moon global ocean, or whether we found a sea that is salty, that is warmer than the frozen surface, it opens up that possibility, the imagination and also the exploration.
This came up several times in the press conference at JPL this morning. The fact that the ocean at Enceladus, which is a really very tiny moon, it has no business being geologically active. And the Cassini team still can't really explain how it can be so geologically active. But it has, like you said, really opened up the space of possibilities for where you could have habitable environments, not only in our own solar system, but in solar systems elsewhere. You keep on hearing about a habitable zone, the region near a star where you can have, where it's neither too hot, so you don't boil off all the water, but too cold, so it's all frozen. It's just right. This is Goldilocks zone. But Saturn's way outside of our solar system's habitable zone. And yet, here we have Enceladus, probably Titan has a sub-crust ocean. All 4 of Jupiter's large moons may have oceans. We know that 3 of them do, and possibly 4 do. Pluto even could have a liquid water ocean underneath its surface, and that's way the heck out there. So it really has expanded our idea of places where you could have liquid water and chemistry and stuff happening to have life living.
What other interesting things have we learned about the moons of Saturn?
I think one of the things that I found surprising from Cassini is how interconnected all the moons and rings and everything are. So at first, I was impressed by the different personalities of the different moons. You have Enceladus, which is bright white and snowy. You have Mimas, which has much deeper craters and the one big whack on its side. You have Dione that has these, what they called from Voyager, the wispy terrain. It turns out to be these fine fractures crisscrossing its surface. You have Tethys with its hexagonal craters. You have Hyperion, which just looks like a sponge. It's totally bizarre. And so each one of them clearly has a different history and a different story to tell. And that's kind of interesting. But then the more Cassini was there, the more we learned that the moons were embedded in the wider system of Saturn, and that something like Iapetus, which is this funky 2-colored moon, it's bright on one side and dark on the other, the dark stuff probably comes from another moon, Phoebe, which is farther out. You learn that I forget now whether it's the leading hemisphere or the trailing hemispheres of several of the moons, Tethys and Dione, and others, they all have a color to them. And that color has to do with E-ring material being bound up in Saturn's magnetic field, which is a whole thing I haven't even mentioned yet, and charged particles impacting, I think, the trailing sides of the moons. I'm not really sure. So that's moons and rings and magnetic field all interrelating to color the surface of one of the moons. So everything is tied together, and you can't understand any one thing without understanding the whole system. And so it's on the one hand, it seems impossibly complex to understand. On the other hand, it's like scientists are so excited because it's like a problem they'll never solve and they'll be busy forever. So they kind of
We've
like
got
that.
so much work to do.
Yeah, yay!
Yeah, I think that it's one of these things where everybody is sad that this is the end of the Cassini mission, because it has opened up so many more questions that people want to ask.
Yeah, well, that's the nature of every planetary mission. So, every planetary mission typically ends having raised more questions than it's answered. It's answered a few, but made you go, oh my gosh, what the heck is that thing over there? And you want to send another mission to answer that. Yeah. So I think, I can't speak for everybody, but my personal feeling about Cassini is that I'm deeply satisfied with what Cassini has accomplished. It's done so much more than was promised. It's lasted a really long time as a really high quality mission. It's pulled off these mission extensions that are like whole nother extra missions on top of its primary mission. It's done a fantastic job. I'm very satisfied. The thing that I'm really sad about is the fact that there aren't follow-on missions. There aren't Cassini-like missions on their way to Uranus or Neptune or back to Jupiter. Another thing that Cassini has made me sad about doesn't have anything to do with Cassini, but it's made me realize how much we lost on Galileo when that stupid antenna didn't open up. We should have had a Cassini-like mission at Jupiter, and we didn't. We didn't get it because we couldn't get the data return. And so we need to go back to Jupiter with another Cassini-like mission that can actually open up our understanding of the moons and the rings and the planet as an integrated system. And we don't have that. Hopefully Europa and JUICE, the European mission, Europa Clipper is the American mission, JUICE is the European mission, will be able to do that for us at Jupiter. But I want to go back to Uranus and Neptune.
Yeah, because we really don't know much about those two planets
we do not.
At this point. Jupiter right now, we've got the Juno mission, which is, limited in its scope, and hopefully going to tell us a lot about the magnetic fields and the composition
the internal structure and
Jupiter itself. But like you're talking about the actual system.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Cassini has just taught us about system science at a giant planet in a way that we haven't ever done at any other planet before.
Yeah, I read it said that that Cassini actually informed us about solar system formation because of looking at this large planet and the ring formation and the moon formation.
Yeah, and it's just a microcosm for the formation of a stellar system. And one of the things that Cassini is doing probably right now, actually, is taking photos of some of these cool little features in the rings called propellers there are these funky little formations in the rings that probably indicate that there's some chunk of mass bigger than a house, smaller than a moon, but it's causing this disturbance in the rings that may or may not form a little moonlet and a gap in the future, or it might dissipate. We don't know. But Cassini's been able to watch these features and how they dynamically interact with the rings, and those may tell us about how how objects in solar systems form from rings, from agglomerations of dust.
Right, how these perturbations potentially build over time to create larger structures and what kind of attractions are necessary. There's so much to learn there. In terms of what Cassini is doing now, this week has actually been big, or the last few weeks leading up to this, it's been big because of all the ring crossings.
Right. So what they did with the very last orbits of Cassini is they set up this really, the navigators just win my respect forever for what they did with Cassini. They set up this Titan flyby. Cassini spent its entire mission outside the ring system. The closest it ever got to the rings was on the very first orbit insertion. It was called Rev 0. It was before they were even in orbit. They passed between the G ring and the F ring, in order to get close enough to Saturn to be really deep in its gravity well and get captured into orbit. And since then, it's been outside the G-ring the whole time. So it's been orbiting. It passes by Titan a lot of times. It might get as close as the orbit of Mimas, but not much closer. And it stayed outside the ring system. And they set up this flyby of Titan toward the end, where they use Titan's gravity to drop its periapsis, its closest approach from Saturn, from outside the G-ring to inside the D-ring, which is to say in between the rings in Saturn. It's not a very big gap. It's a very small gap, as a matter of fact. There isn't a lot of wiggle room. And they had Cassini passing through that gap once a week on every orbit. And in a way, it turned Cassini into a duplicate of Juno. And when you think about the fact that Juno's like $1 billion mission, this last several weeks of Cassini flying these proximal orbits is like getting a whole nother New Frontiers $1 billion mission out of a spacecraft that we already had out there. And so it's and from what they said at today's press briefing, it's really going to do some revolutionary science. They said that the gravity field doesn't look anything like what they expected it to be. They said they didn't find any dust where they expected to find dust between the D-ring and the planet. There's actually a lot less than they expected, which is good news for the survival of the spacecraft.
Right.
And didn't they fly it backwards, like the first time through with the instruments protected? What they
do when they're concerned about dust hazards is they turn the whole spacecraft so that the dish is flying forward, so that the dish, like everything is shielded underneath the dish. And they call that, they say, we're flying antenna to ram. That sounds like something you'd say in Star Trek. Ensign, that antenna to ram. Aye, Captain. It's like, I loved it when they said that. So yeah, they did that the first time, but they learned very quickly there really wasn't any dust to worry about. And so they were able to turn so that they could turn their instruments toward it and sample what was there. They've learned that the magnetic field and the rotation axis are almost perfectly aligned, which is not something that magnetic fields are supposed to be able to do. So that's sending them back to the drawing board. And so I think that the science from this phase of the mission is not going to come out very fast. It's going to take a while for them to understand what's going on. Probably it'll help a lot to have Juno at Jupiter studying a different planet in the same solar environment and kind of help them go back and forth and try to understand what these two different giant planets are doing with their magnetic fields and their gravity fields. So that's going to be stuff to look forward to for the next several years.
Okay. Yeah. I was wondering about Cassini versus Juno on making these close passes to Saturn. And I mean, Jupiter is the largest planet, so obviously has the largest magnetosphere, has the largest gravitational field, has the largest possibility for negatively affecting a spacecraft. But I was wondering, okay, why have we gotten this close to Saturn before? Because it's the end. This is the swan song, taking the risks.
The other thing they can do by passing in between the rings and Saturn is they can measure the mass of the rings for the first time. From up until now, all you've been able to do is measure the mass of the rings plus Saturn. So we've got the mass of both of them together. But when you pass in between them, you can separate the influence of their two masses. So we're going to find out for the first time how much Saturn's rings weigh, which is going to be cool. But we're going to probably end the mission not knowing how long a day on Saturn is. That's one of the most frustrating things about this magnetic field and rotation axis being perfectly aligned is they use the offset to figure out how fast giant planets rotate. That's how we know how fast Uranus and Jupiter and everything rotates. But since they're perfectly aligned, we actually don't know. We don't know how long a day on Saturn is.
Huh. That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
That is one of the questions they're trying to answer is how fast does Saturn actually rotate?
We don't know. They measured it with Voyager and they measured it with Cassini and there was a difference of like many seconds, which is simply not physically possible with a mass the size of Saturn. That makes no sense. So what that tells you is that the way what they thought they were measuring is not the day length. And so they've got to, I don't think we're going to know how long a day is on Saturn after the end of this 13-year mission.
Wow. We've been following Saturn for almost an entire year, halfway through-ish.
Oh, half a year. Yeah.
Half a year. Yeah. About almost a half a year. And we're still not going to know how long a day is. All right. let's talk about what else do we want to talk about? Do you guys want to talk about the end?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about.
We have about 10 more minutes left to talk with Emily. And so I want to make sure we get the good stuff in here.
Right. So I was reading up on this a little bit today, and at first I was kind of wondering the same thing. Why do we need to put Cassini down? Why do we need to send him to the fishes? And the background behind that.
Cassini's the reason for its own demise. So if we hadn't discovered these amazing, possibly habitable environments on Enceladus and Titan, mostly Enceladus, we could have just left it in a graveyard orbit around Saturn. But because there is the possibility of habitable environments there, and Cassini was not sterilized to the highest possible standard before we launched it, they're being, out of a great abundance of caution, going to kill it into Saturn so that it won't in the future crash into Enceladus. Now, most people listening to that explanation who know anything about deep space are like, but wait a minute, this thing has spent, however long it is, 20 years in space, exposed to all kinds of radiation environments. There's no way there's any bugs still alive on this thing. And yeah, they're probably right, but...
What about tardigrades, though? There could be a tardigrade.
We don't want to be wrong about that. So it's just the responsible thing to do is to make sure that we dispose of it properly and make sure that it can't possibly contaminate anything.
I always would, and I get that, but every time I hear that kind of an explanation, I think, but what if this is the one chance to get life off of our planet onto another planet in the solar system? And how we did it is the off chance that there was a microbe still alive on this craft, and we put it into an environment where it could survive. And that's the second body in the solar system with life now.
So to allay your fears about this, I can promise you that there are meteorites from Earth that have landed on Mars. So multiple times, many times. So we have tried this experiment several times before. And so,
dinosaur fossils on Mars, right?
Oh, not very likely.
Possible. It's possible. But we've the turn for the final approach has been made, right?
Yes.
A couple days
it's
ago.
inevitable
And
now.
so we're now. This is it. It's on its final descent.
It was actually inevitable when they set it into these proximal orbits. And that was one of the conditions for doing the proximal orbits, because they couldn't be 100% sure that there wasn't a spacecraft killing dust particle in the way of Cassini as it was going between the rings and the planet. But it hasn't done a single maneuver since entering those proximal orbits. It was always inevitable that it was going to have this encounter with Titan that would nudge it on its death course. So even if its first ring plane crossing after entering proximal orbits had crashed into a moonlet that we didn't see, all of Cassini's parts that survived that would have inevitably crashed into Saturn.
Very clean.
And it's going to be signaling back to us during the whole final descent.
Right.
Whatever data it can possibly grab, it's going to be grabbing and sending. And then it's going to be dead and gone.
Yes.
Destroyed.
Super
in
dead.
the atmosphere. Super dead. But it'll still be talking to us.
Well, not while it's super dead.
Its data will be talking
the time
to
delay.
us.
The time delay.
Yeah. So there is that. So yes, its final signals will depart Saturn, and they take 1 hour and 23 minutes to get to Earth. So in this this superposition of, is there such a thing as simultaneity in the universe? No, there is not. As far as we know, we will get the information of its death 1 hour and 23 minutes after the time on its clock that it died. But simultaneity is an illusion.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. Can you talk about the live streaming that's going to happen? Do you know what are they actually going to be live streaming? People crying at JPL? Or
well, I've watched 2 spacecraft die in the last 2 years. And both of them were European ones. It was Philae and then Rosetta. Mm-hmm. And so what you get when you predict that your spacecraft is going to be dying at a specific time, is somebody puts up a little graph that shows you the current strength of the radio signal that you're receiving from the spacecraft. And so probably what we'll see is a graph that'll have like a little scruff and then a big old spike and then a little scruff. And that big old spike is the carrier signal from the radio transmitter on Cassini. And that shows you that the Deep Space Network is receiving a good, strong signal from the spacecraft. And we'll watch that. It'll be a little scruffy. The spike will kind of vary in its strength, but it should be pretty strong. And then all of a sudden it'll go doop, and then boop, and then all we'll see is scruff. It's like flatlining, basically. And I watched that with Rosetta last time, and it was totally fully expected. You knew the moment was going to happen, and it happens, and you're like, oh, I guess that's it.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask too, is does it feel like, for the people that worked on this mission, does it feel like a death in the family? Is it really sad, or is it more like a graduation? Like,
no, I think it's more like the former.
Complete.
I think it's more like the former. I mean, I actually had the experience of knowing ahead of time that a relative of mine was about to pass away. A whole bunch of family traveled to his bedside. It was sort of sad and awkward to be at the hospital, but at the same time, it's a family reunion, right? You're getting together with people that you haven't been with for a while. So it's this strange combination of happy, sad. You're sharing happy stories about the relative. And so it's this funny, and you don't really know how you're going to be feeling from one moment to the next. Like I say, I feel very satisfied about what Cassini's done. Most of the time I feel very upbeat. Sometimes I'm like in denial. Sometimes I'm like yelling, no, don't go. You know, I never really know how I'm going to feel from one moment to the next. At this morning's press briefing, looking especially at the project manager, who's an engineer, you could tell most of the time he was feeling mostly pride, great pride at a mission accomplished, a mission very well done. But also, I think, having a little bit of difficulty confronting the fact that as of Friday morning, he's not going to be he won't be able to be devoted to the health of the spacecraft anymore. So it's this wild mix of emotions. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of weeping and tissues, Kleenex being passed around, but also pride.
And also something that kind of I wonder about too is this is a data collection mission. Like this is data. That data now is not just done. Like, oh, we got the data, now we're through. Put it in a box, goes on the shelf. This data is alive. This data is going to be worked with. This data is going to be gone over, poured over, and used for another 20 years until we can get something else.
Or more.
To look at it. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. And in fact, the science team, for them, the mission isn't over at all. For them, they have another year of being paid as members of the Cassini mission to validate and archive the data. So it takes a year. That's the proprietary period, 9 months to a year, to go through all the data, make sure that it's all been calibrated, prepared properly. It has all the right metadata associated with it. It's all been cataloged, blah, blah, blah. And they then deliver these archives to something called the Planetary Data System, which is NASA's public archive. You can Google that right now, PDS, and you can find every image from every spacecraft that NASA has ever launched going back to the 70s. Some of the earliest stuff is not available in the PDS just because it wasn't in a format that's easy to transmit digitally. But since like Viking, everything is up there on the PDS, and you can go to it right now. There's a learning curve associated with learning how to download and use it, but it's all there for anybody. And that's what's going to happen with Cassini. And
Cassini has something like 425,000 images.
Yeah, something like taken. That. 635 gigabytes of data, which, you know, you could fit that on a fairly small drive these days. But when you compare it to what we got from Voyager, it's actually a lot. And we're still using Voyager data now to make discoveries. There were scientists who discovered new moons and Voyager Uranus images just a couple of years ago using image processing techniques that hadn't been available before. And so we're still going to be developing new techniques, new ways of understanding data. And remember, Cassini isn't just images. There's spectrometers. There's all kinds of radio instruments. There's magnetometer, all kinds of stuff that we're going to be learning from for decades to come.
This might be this Friday, the 15th, might be the end of Cassini, the craft, but its legacy will live on.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say, just from a societal and cultural perspective, I don't know if any craft has quite captured the public's attention and heart the way that Cassini has. I mean, Hubble has done an amazing job, but Cassini, I think, is right up there.
Yeah.
On the Planetary blog, you posted an opera that was written for Cassini.
Yes, that's our board member, Bob Picardo. pulling out his pipes for performing a little operatic ode to Cassini.
I love it. And if anybody searches Cassini on Twitter, on Google, you will find many things that people have to say about the end of the craft. And Emily, I look forward to reading all of your writing as you go through this. I guess it's this ratcheting down and then the mourning period.
Yeah, but a lot of people are posting like their lists of favorite images this week, and I'm totally refraining because it's a lot of people are doing it, and I want to emphasize starting next week that there's this archive of 500,000 images. You can go in there, and even though I've seen a lot of these things before, I don't remember them, and so just going to a random spot in the archive and starting to poke around gives me awe-inspiring views that I don't remember seeing before, and we can just go on forever just sharing these images. Go back to Voyager and do that as well.
Yeah. And as we end Cassini, let's start working, get NASA to get some missions out to Uranus and Neptune.
Absolutely.
More planetary missions. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. Can you let people know where they can find you online and follow your writing about this?
Absolutely. I'm at the Planetary Society, which is planetary.org on the web since 1996. And and then you can find me on Twitter at Lakdawalla, Lakdawalla.
Wonderful. And we won't keep you. I know you have other places to be this evening.
Again, my kids appreciate that.
I hope you enjoy your evening and have a nice good night with your kids. Thank you once again.
Cheers.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
It was wonderful talking with Emily again. She is so knowledgeable and well-spoken on these topics. And I think she has a wonderful personal connection also. She's got the humanity in this stuff. And I think Cassini is one of these images, one of these missions that I think has really captured humanity.
I was scrolling through some of those images today, and I just kept thinking, are these real? Are these CGI? They look like they've been made by a computer.
No, they're not. And like she said,
so crisp. I can't believe I'm looking at an actual picture of Saturn.
Yeah. I mean, there are some images that are actual pictures of Saturn, but they've got artists' renderings where Cassini has been placed in the foreground to give you an idea of what it's like where Cassini is in time. But for anyone who is interested, I know for those of you who are watching live right now, this is very helpful. And if I get the podcast out in time and you hear it, this will be very helpful for those of you interested in watching the NASA coverage of the live streaming of the end of NASA. So NASA JPL is going to be streaming to YouTube and also to their Ustream channels and also to nasa.gov/live for the mission control end. And so from actually now, there's probably stuff playing, but at 4 a.m. Pacific time, starting at 4 a.m. Pacific time, we can watch the live stream of the Requiem.
That's Friday.
Cassini. Friday, 4 a.m., Friday the 15th. 4 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're on the East Coast, it's very nice.
Very
7 a.m.,
manageable.
that's very manageable. I, on the other hand, am going to end up with a stomach ache because I'll be getting up too early in the morning. Be like, oh, this hurts.
Yeah.
I can take a little pain for Cassini. I can do that. And if anybody is interested also at saturn.jpl.nasa.gov is the mission information for the grand finale of Cassini. And in this grand finale, there's also a book that you can download, a Saturn book that you can download, and it's free for downloading. You can take it as an ebook for your Kindle, for your computer. Yeah.
I just love when you get free data, free science, free stuff.
So the thing is, we say free, but the reason is because the American people paid for this. We in America for those of us who are, I'm saying we because that's where we as the hosts of the show are,
Right.
we paid for this.
Yes.
This was ours. And so for these images to be available, I say free,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
they are available to everyone because they're ours. And this is
What a good point.
Wonderful government transparency.
That's such a great point, is that we all helped pay to get Cassini there and take these pictures.
There are a few people who ran the mission and were the special people who made it happen, but America, we did good.
Yeah. And we have made space exploration a priority for a long time. And I hope that it continues.
Yeah, and also thanks to collaborations with the European Space Agency and others, we've had things like the Huygens probe, which told us a lot about Titan. You know, we've got these wonderful, we've got missions that are working together. Like she said, the Rosetta and Philae, that was the European Space Agency, and we've got and the Italian Space Agency, and we've got so many other things working on Mars together. The New Horizons mission. We are collaborating around the planet to explore our neighborhood. Let's keep doing it. Come on, people. Let's do it. All right. Is it time for us to take a break?
It's definitely time.
It is definitely time. I think I have said all the things. There's lots of, we'll put links to all the Cassini stuff on the TWIS webpage. But then there will also be links available through social media and on our YouTube descriptions. But for now, we are going to take a quick break. Emily Lakdawalla was amazing. Love having her on the show. This is This Week in Science. We'll be back with some science news in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Explain the things you heard with more than intuition. The line of reason shows the way to go. No conclusion. The method to hypothesis and patience are the only things I need. Put on a pair of goggles and go looking for the things I couldn't see.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with This Week in Science. Day in, day out, week after, well, I guess not day in, day out, week in, week out, season after season, as we move forward through this world, uncovering more and more scientific gems, little pieces of information to make our understanding of the world a little richer and more interesting. Thank you for going on this journey with us. And thank you for supporting us through this journey. For those of you who are able and willing, we do appreciate all the help that you give us in allowing this show to go on. And in that sense, I would like to tell everybody about our website. TWIS.org is where you can go to find information about the show. And right now, you can pre-order your 2018 Blair's Animal Corner calendar. And I know a few individuals already have. People are starting to get their orders in to make sure they get those calendars, because they are going to be great. Blair is working very hard to complete another quality calendar of original artwork. And it's going to be a coloring book calendar this time. You guys get to color it yourselves. Animals, you can make them purple if you want, or you can go with anatomically correct colors. That's up to you, whatevs. But make sure you pre-order, get those orders in so that you don't miss out. Go to TWIS.org and click on the TWIS 2018 pre-order image link. Make that happen. If you are interested in other ways you can support TWIS, go click on the Zazzle store link. The Zazzle store link takes you over to our Zazzle store, which is full of all sorts of wonderful TWIS goodies, mouse pads, t-shirts, hats, mugs, with a TWIS logo, and also with art from past Blair's Animal Corner calendars. So if you are interested in a lumbar pillow with a grizzly bear on it, this is where you can get it. Do you want your TWIS This Week in Science apron? Oh, yeah, you do. The holidays are coming up. Don't you want a TWIS apron to cook that Thanksgiving turkey? Better go get it. Coffee mug? Morning coffee? Mouse pad? Yeah, the daily stuff, right? You want your TWIS in your life every day? This is where you get it. And a portion of the proceeds go to supporting TWIS. Another way you can help support us is by just direct donations. We have a donate button along the side panel. Click on that donate button. It takes you right to a PayPal interface. Makes it easy for you to donate at your whim and the amount that you would like to donate. Click on the Patreon button on the top bar, and that takes you over to our Patreon community, where you can choose which level you'd like to support us at in an ongoing fashion, episode after episode, and it helps us keep this show afloat. You're really like executive producing the show when you get into supporting us through PayPal and Patreon. You're keeping this show going, making sure we can actually pay the intertube bills. If donations, support in an ongoing way is not something you're capable of doing, just tell your friends about TWIS. If you can tell people about iTunes, about subscribing to us on Google Play, or whether you're someone who listens to us on Stitcher or Spreaker or watches on YouTube, let people know. Share us. Help us out by doing that. And regardless, we really could not do this show without you. So thank you for your support.
Can't believe you believe in that shell. We disagree, but I still give a damn. The ramification of treatments from holy men leaves me slightly queasy deep down in the abdomen. Convinced that the lives that they lead need adjusting. They drive to the bookstore and blindly start trusting the miracles and cures all laid down in black ink, never even bothering to stop and think.
And we are back with more This Week in Science.
Oh yeah, Justin, what you got? Oh wait, no, I got stuff.
I got one. You want me to go first? I'll go first.
You want to go first? But I got things. Yeah, why don't you go first? Go first. Go for it. Do it.
Oh, well, I didn't really mean to step on your toes.
Do it.
Okay, gaming for whatever reason is often considered a guy thing. If we picture a pool hall, a card room, bowling alley, a video game arcade, we might have a tendency to imagine these places filled with boys or men. But girls are gamers too, and have been a lot longer than you might think. And while we're on the subject, games themselves have actually been around for a really long time. In the Viking era, for instance, across Scandinavia, a board game was played, no doubt for fun, as well as to train warriors in battlefield strategy. These games are mentioned in the sagas as far back as the 4th century. A chess-like game, and actually probably most likely is the predecessor to what became chess, was a game that was played where the king sits in the middle of the board and must be protected or attacked from the outside. A Viking warrior burial discovered in the 1880s included a game board and pieces, and based on other objects in the burial, this was no ordinary warrior. Surrounded by an axe, a spear, a couple of shields, a sword, armor-piercing arrows, 2 horses. This was very likely a Viking leader, a commander, who in death was laid to rest with their most prized possessions. Weapons, yes, horses, sure, and a game of strategy. The warrior was buried in the Viking town of Birka during the mid-10th century. Since its discovery, the site has served as a model of what a professional Viking warrior grave looks like, compared to, say, a farmer buried with an axe who may have swung at nothing more menacing than a tree. This Viking, this professional Viking warrior with this game of strategy at their side. But what they don't know or didn't know when they first discovered the Viking warrior's grave was something that was only hinted at through more careful observation of the skeleton's morphology, and which now has been proven by DNA that it is the that this gaming Viking warrior commander is a woman, dispelling the myth that girls only recently got into gaming once and for all. Oh, and that Lady Viking Warlords was like a real thing also.
Right.
Maybe, because what would science be without a bit of debate? This story
He's
came
got
out.
a scoop. I can't wait to hear it.
I do have a scoop, and I came across it on Twitter and then again on Facebook as I saw people starting to talk to historians and Viking history experts, people who have been studying Vikings for years.
Right.
And the question now is not whether or not this was a female, right?
That's been solved.
That's been solved. They were able to see, oh, look, there's no Y chromosome in this ancient DNA. We've got X's. This is a female. But there are researchers who have brought up the point that there's really a lot of unknowns here, and that the researchers who published this research have jumped to conclusions. And so Judith Jesch, who has a blog called Norse and Viking Ramblings, she says that this new paper doesn't demonstrate that this woman was in fact a Viking warrior. She may have been the wife or friendly female of a high-ranking Viking warrior, and maybe she was buried with these game pieces as a token of their relationship. We also don't know, these bones could have gotten all mixed up. They've said that this Birka site, where many different burial sites have been dug up, they've gotten like 1,000 different bodies out of this site. That the original methodology for taking the bodies out of the ground maybe wasn't the best, and there might have been some mixing up of things.
So to that though, I just throw out a couple things real quick. One, for what would it be? What is it? What year is it now? So for 137 years, they just assumed it was a man.
Yes.
And so no controversy there. No reason to dig any deeper. No reason to look at the methodology for the recovery of these bones. That's a Viking warrior.
Right. Yeah.
And as soon as it became a woman, they're like, whoa!
I think this is
back and look at everything all over again, because now we have to raise doubt. And there are stories of Viking women, Viking leaders, even warlords, and within the troops, and the whole thing of the shield maidens, which is made very popular with a Viking warlord woman. And the Vikings, whatever it's, I can't remember what network is putting that out. I think it's AMC. I could be wrong. That's like seems normal to people now, but it is based off of some stories of the past of these women being involved. Because
it's legends. There's no written history that actually says women were warriors. There's no written history that says women were shield maidens. There's no written history that can confirm this. And I totally agree with you that since that there's a double standard here, and that since it was a man, everyone was like, oh, it's a male warrior, of course. And now that it's a woman, people are asking for more evidence. But what I hope this does is it ends up making these researchers ask for more evidence from the very beginning, because it's possible they've since looked at the bones as well, and the bones don't show any damage or stress fractures that you would expect of the type of somebody who was involved in combat or involved in strenuous activity. There's none of that. There are no markings or hallmarks that would be indicative of that kind of activity. And so either you get to a certain level, and maybe there was a certain group of warriors who never actually had to fight
So that wasn't
and so
right.
she's a warrior, but was in
She's a
name
figurehead
only.
warrior. Yeah.
So yes and no. So like that would not have been a very Viking way to take the battlefield.
But it would be the same thing for a male too. You know, it's like they're just now looking at the bones and going, oh, maybe it wasn't really a warrior. Maybe this is weird. And so now they maybe have to take the story back. So the warrior part
but like
the debate.
But like the game. Yeah, but like the game that they play, the Viking leaders take the battlefield. They're not behind the lines. They're in the very middle of the board where the action is. But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing hand-to-hand combat and not just directing the troops go left, go right, shield wall, or whatever you would yell if you were a Viking. Throw some spears that way, hit them with that, whatever. You know, hard to tell. You're right. We don't really know.
Well, and part of this, right, is we would like to assume that all genders can do all things and always have done all things. But why was this headline that was all over the internet this week? Because it still is, even though we've heard of it in lore, it's still unusual. It's still a buzzline. It's still something to catch people's attention because it's not the norm.
Well,
so,
it's
potentially
also
wrong.
hitting it's potentially, but it's also hitting
right?
a society that's still rather misogynistic about gender roles. And one of the things that we do know about the Viking era Scandinavians is that there wasn't this. It wasn't so then. Women had the same rights as men did. They were free in society. They weren't chattel or cattle or however you would say that, and that they had vote and could own property and had say in things that went on around them. So it is a society that if there's going to be lady warriors, that's one you would expect to see it in. So to me, when I first saw it, I was like, why are we surprised? How come there isn't this record? I just kind of assumed that was already a thing that was known, but it wasn't a thing that was known, or it maybe still isn't. But again, in some of the sagas and the stories, they talk about female warriors.
But that's just it. We haven't found actual hard proof of it yet.
Until now.
So that's, we don't know yet. That's the question, right? So
maybe she was laid to rest with these things for a reason. Maybe her body fell in with these things somehow. Maybe things got thrown in after her.
But
we don't know.
Right. So to Kiki's point.
Hang on. But to my point, because we don't know, and I'll stop mansplaining everything, because we don't know is exactly why we shouldn't heap extra doubt upon it. If for 137 years we were completely satisfied with this being the grave of a Viking warrior, only now to challenge it because it's a woman?
See, Justin, that's not science. That's so not science. Science is about finding proof for things and disproof. So for example, showing the fact that there's no stress on the body is a big piece of doubt on this individual being a warrior. So the question is not because she's a woman, she's not a warrior. The question is, have we identified all of the things that potentially could tell us about this individual? And from the get-go, the answer is no.
Yeah, but then again,
there are things that
you're a warrior.
So this is the debate. And so now what is wonderful, and as we learned, as we were talking about with Emily about Cassini, science opens up new questions, and it's good science if it does open up new questions. And so it's not really science if it's like, oh, it's a dude warrior, Viking warrior dude. All right, there we go. And you don't look at the bones anymore, but they're looking more closely and they're starting to ask questions. And so now this raises questions. Why are there no stress fractures on the bones? What was it about the society and the different roles of individuals in society? What was the burial like? Was it a warrior burial? Was she buried that way because she was a warrior? Was she buried that way because she was the wife of a warrior? This opens new questions. And so what I hope is that this leads to more and better scientific inquiry into this historical time period.
And if all of the raids were on British Isle monasteries and they were just skewering priests, Probably not a lot of wear and tear taking place. But I do like the idea
Maybe.
that because the game is in there,
Mhm.
and that
And if
that
it was
game
the
is
first
probably
female gamer, great.
well,
Prove
okay, but I mean, so the scenario, the other scenario that's being presented then is this is possibly the warrior chief's commander's wife, and he wants her to go into the next world with a full assortment of weapons, which she's never used. A game that perhaps in the most sentimental aspect, they played this chess-like game together over long hours of drinking mead or what, I don't know what the Vikings drank back, but like that, like this is a sentimental burial by the Viking to send his, but didn't they, like, I don't know.
They were people that could be sentimental.
They were. But if it's fully
Cognitive
lacking,
dissonance, man.
if it's fully lacking then too in any sort of other, gender specific role accoutrement,
Mhm.
that tells me, that's sort of weird that they would put them into a burial with somebody else's cherished.
Okay, so
Let's let the scientists keep looking at it.
Yeah,
Let's let them
I
debate
have
it. Let's
one
let
last
them
question.
do the studies and figure it out.
Yeah.
If we hadn't found out it was a woman, but we had found that there were no signs of stress on this individual's body, would you be saying what you're saying right now?
Exactly. No, that's my point. That's my point. I agree with you. You wouldn't be challenging the fact that this.
No,
was
I'm saying we would, and you wouldn't be fighting the challenge.
No, I would just say, like, yeah, it was not a time of heavy battles, or they just had the numbers where they just overpowered whatever enemies that they had, or maybe they just hunted a lot.
And maybe that's what it was for this woman, but the point still stands that there is
new data.
There's new information to be taken into account, and it's kind of circumstantial evidence that she might have been a warrior. It's not, there's no definitive smoking gun.
And when we say warrior, we keep saying warrior as if that's the thing, but it based on what they were saying before, this is a leader of warriors. And so
who got there by never getting in a fight before in her life.
No, but by being a great strategist, by being able to lead troops, keep the morale high, get them into position on the battlefield where they don't get killed.
I'm gonna sit back here with the map. I got the map in my chest.
Middle of it, right in the middle of it, but
and tell you what to do.
And protected. That's maybe the hallmark of a great strategist. That she didn't have to swing an axe.
Very well. So I was going to throw this into the Viking story. I was going to throw it into my section on this week's bad science headlines and how science writers have been just jumping the gun on things. But
as they well should.
Yeah. No.
Well, I mean,
so another story. Jump into another story this week. We've talked before about the Voynich manuscript in this show. The Voynich manuscript is a really strange illustrated book out of the 15th century, and people have been trying to read it, don't really know what it says. There's just these strange pictures in it that people are like, I don't know what this does. A history researcher came out this week. His name is Nicholas Gibbs, and he wrote an article in the Times Literary Supplement about how he figured it out. He figured out what the Voynich manuscript was, and in fact, it was an early gynecological manuscript.
Oh my gosh, there were some Georgia O'Keeffes in there, huh?
Yeah. Lots of illustrations of women showering and strange, very strange images. So this book was discovered in 1912, and since then it's been the subject of great debate, and people have been looking at it and trying to translate it and figure out. And so for someone to come out and say, I figured it out, the media jumped all over this, and the fact that the Times Literary Supplement published his article, the media said, okay, it's coming from a reputable source. He's got to know what he's talking about. Put on the brakes. Well, turns out this article came out and all the media stuff about it came out saying Nicholas Gibbs figured it out, when in fact, people don't really think so. So according to Ars Technica, who wrote of Lisa Fagan Davis, who's from the Medieval Academy of America, she said they're not grammatically correct. It doesn't. So he came up with 2 lines of translation from the text to prove his point about it being a gynecological book. And she said they're not grammatically correct. It doesn't result in Latin that makes sense. Frankly, I'm a little surprised the TLS, the Times Literary Supplement, published it. If they had simply sent it to the Beinecke Library, which is where the Voynich manuscript is held, they would have rebutted it in the heartbeat. And so part of the claim rests on this idea that the Voynich manuscript had an index at one time that provided something of a translation key to abbreviations that were used in the pages. But he doesn't have any evidence other than there are some missing pages from the book. So he came up with what he says is, he said, this is shorthand. These are abbreviations. Here, look, I'll translate it for you. And then he says there must have been an index, but it's missing. But look, it all works. And she says, and people are just saying no. And his idea that it was a medical book on women's health is not a new idea. Other people have come up with that idea previously using the same exact evidence. And you know what it comes out? Gibbs is also known as a television writer. And he's written a series of books about how to write and sell television screenplays. And he was paid by a history channel. He was paid by a television channel to do his research into the Voynich manuscript for a couple of years. And so there is a quote that I would like to, from Gibbs, that in 5 years, he would like to think he could have a returnable series up and running. And the writer, Annalee Newitz, says, considering the dubious accuracy of many History Channel documentaries, he might just get his wish. So
you don't like the Vikings? Is that what you're
saying? So the Voynich manuscript news that's come out, this guy took the work of other people. He got paid by a TV studio. He's probably going to have a TV series come out, and he didn't really do original work, and it's not what he did isn't incredibly accurate. He didn't actually translate the Voynich manuscript, unfortunately. And then the other bad headlines from this week. Everybody, have you seen all the headlines that if you sit all the time, you're going to die?
I didn't see it this week, but I've seen other ones.
Right. So it's been a question for a while, sitting, standing, how much should you move? You know, I've got a standing desk now, but that's mostly because I have high energy and I like to stand up while I'm talking. I like doing that. But, you know, kind of makes you wonder about all those times that you spend binge watching your favorite TV series on Netflix or Amazon, you know, these many hours. How is this going to affect my health?
Or the 8 to 10 hours a day I spend at a desk.
Exactly. Many people work at sedentary jobs. And what is that going to do to your health? And so there was an article published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, a well-respected outlet. And this article, Patterns of Sedentary Behavior and Mortality in the U.S., Middle-Aged and Older Adults, a National Cohort Study. This study took a large sample of individuals from another study, and it was somewhere originally the Regards study, Reasons for Geographic and Racial Differences in Stroke, had 30,239 whites and blacks aged 45 years or older between 2003 and 2007. They took 7,985 of those participants who had worn accelerometers. Anyway, the news headlines that came out this last week, pretty much, they all said, all the stories that were written said, sitting a lot overall and sitting for long interrupted stretches of time can increase your risk of all-cause mortality. Basically, if you sit a lot, you're more likely to die for any reason.
This sounds highly correlative.
Okay, that's better. Okay.
Yeah, and so everybody ran with the sitting down thing.
Right.
The problem is this study did not measure sitting down. This study only had accelerometers on individuals, and the
Right.
accelerometers were limited in their ability to actually measure movement. And so this sedentary activity could be lying down, it could be sitting down, it could be even doing very light activity around the house and still be considered, and under the headlines, that would still be considered sitting.
So really what it's about is how much cardio you're doing. It sounds like.
Exactly. How much cardio? But in the end, the individuals, the statistics in this study don't really work out either, because of the way they had to manipulate the groups to try and figure out who was most active and who was least active. And it turns out the most active group's mean age was 65, and the mean age of the least active group was 75. And so this is conflating the recommendation here. It's like, oh, you're going to die from any cause if you're sitting down. It's conflating age groups too.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so you're also more likely to die if you're 10 years older.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. So
This just in. Oh, people have a greater chance of dying than young people.
Yes.
Yep. That's
More on that at 11.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I love just from the abstract itself, before the conclusion, it says limitation. Participants may not be representative of the general US population. So right off the bat, they're like, yeah, this may not actually represent all the people in the United States. And then all the news stories were like, you're gonna die.
Right.
And then in the something else the authors did write, in analyses examining the joint effects of total sedentary time and prolonged uninterrupted sedentary bouts, the sample size and number of deaths were small for the groups of participants who had high levels of only one of the sedentary characteristics, that is, high total sedentary time and low sedentary bout time, or low total sedentary time and high sedentary bout time. Although the association between total sedentary time alone, but not sedentary bout duration alone, and mortality suggests that the volume of sedentary time may be more hazardous, the more hazardous sedentary characteristic. The small number of events and wide confidence intervals in these groups render these findings inconclusive.
Yep.
Thus, caution is warranted when interpreting these results.
Oh my gosh.
Hi, everybody. Headline writers. I know, and everybody, you want to have a big study and you want to get it out there, and oh yeah, and this study was also funded by Coca-Cola.
What was their end game?
So the end game there, and the money, this was something covered by the New York Times a while back, but the issue was Coca-Cola was putting a lot of money into funding research on exercise and sedentary behavior in an effort to get the conversation away from that of sugary drinks. It's not, let's just not talk about sugary drinks anymore. Let's talk about how active you are.
Right. Yeah,
Yes.
because nothing is great on a marathon like an ice cold Coke.
That's right. I mean, there is data out there. This study was supposed to be a really good, complete study, but it really didn't answer questions that we wanted to ask.
I appreciate that the original study actually said the exact words, that it was inconclusive and you should show caution when drawing conclusions from that study.
Yep.
The issue is, I think some of the science writers didn't get to that last sentence before they started deciding what they were going to run with.
I also kind of like that there's a scientist who's been paid to do this study by Coca-Cola who's also, by the way, you should totally disregard everything that I wrote.
Yes, exactly. I published this paper because I finished the study and I was paid
Disclaimer,
to do the study.
disclaimer, disclaimer.
Yeah.
I was paid to write this.
Right. So
That's
there's
yes.
a couple of things here. So one is you can't always access full papers just as a random person, but you can often access the abstract.
Yes.
So if you read somebody's article about a study that's come out, be a skeptic, click the link, and at least read the abstract so you can get an idea. Usually you can find out in the abstract if the sample size is bonkers small, right? You can have a good idea if there's some sort of confounding variables, if they don't mention a blind at all, right? So there's things that you can see that are red flags even in the little free abstract, even if the whole paper isn't available. Be your own advocate for truth because people are trying to get you to read science, and honestly, I can't fault them too much for that. They're trying to get you to click on science instead of on the link to, you know, some celebrity's breakup news, and they're getting you to think critically. Unfortunately,
I hope they get you to think critically.
Right. So that's the big question mark. So we have to make sure that we're actually that's what part of what we're doing, right? Every week I read animal stories that the headline says something and I'll read it and I'll go, we already knew that though. And then I click on the actual story and there's actually a really interesting thing that we find out, but it wasn't the headline because they want people to click.
Oh, it's like the Viking lady. It had nothing to do with the Viking lady. It was all about the fact that they had a game that was as important as the sword. That to me was like the cool part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I'm sure that there's going to be a Dr. Quack TV show where everybody stand up. Everyone stand up right now. Right now, you have a much better chance of living a longer life than you did 3 seconds ago. You're welcome. Like,
and everyone's like,
just
just clap right now. Thank you. We're all standing up. It's good.
We're gonna get rid of the couch. We're gonna live forever. That's how it's gonna happen.
No, I mean, there's evidence that standing too long, if you're not moving, is actually worse for you than sitting down.
It's bad
because of venous return. There are venous return issues for many people. The muscle pumps in your legs, bending your legs, moving, that's the stuff that gets the blood flowing. There's evidence that moving exercise is good for your brain. It's good for your body. There are lots of benefits to it. Too much moving it can be bad for you too. We know that high endurance athletes can die of stroke and cardiac arrest, at a higher amount than more moderate athletes. Like there's some strange things that we're finding out. If you can, we also know that for injuries, if you can get up and start moving after an injury sooner, it'll help it heal. There are many things.
Do you know what the most?
We are learning more about this. This study gave a little bit more evidence that yes, being sedentary, but you should try to move a little bit more than being sedentary.
Do you know what sport?
The headlines were wrong.
You know what sport results in the most emergency room visits? By percentage, the most dangerous sport to be involved in.
What?
Guess. Just guess. Throw it
running.
Oh no! I bet you it's online gaming.
No, it's not online gaming.
I've got thumb issues.
No, everybody goes to the hospital for a thumb issue. They go to Best Buy when they throw the controller at the TV and go, "Oh, I just broke my TV." But no, what would you think the most physically damaging sport?
Yeah, I think it's running. You tear an ACL.
It's not running.
Really?
I already got it. Not going out. You would go with just running over football and hockey? Really?
Yeah. Well, because you're not controlling on the percentage of people that do it.
Okay. So what is it?
But it's not the percentage of people that do it. It's by percentage of people that do it.
What is it?
I don't know.
Not the number of people that do it.
What's the answer? Well, I want to know. What's the answer?
Gymnastics.
Oh, yeah. Well,
gymnastics results in more emergency room.
Yeah.
More emergency room visits than football or
I was
hockey.
one of those. I went to the emergency room, and
Well,
there were
that's
probably
my
a few
mathy
times I
question,
should have
though.
gone to the emergency room and didn't. Yeah.
My mathy question
Those-
is that gross or is that controlled by the percentage of population that does that
Controlled
sport?
by the percentage of population involved in the sport.
Okay, great.
So it's not actually more emergency room visits.
No, that's probably
It's percentage
right.
of it's percentage of
I
people
get
that do it. Yeah.
because anybody can go out and do that and sprain their ankle. So you're probably right on your take. Absolutely, because by just number of people, sure, there's not that many of us doing gymnastics or hockey.
Right. Exactly.
But by
All right, so
by percentage.
let's move past this percentage of people who get injured, and let's move into
Are we into like the second story? And
let's get into yes, we're gonna get into some real. Let's get some cool science news here. We're gonna talk about percentage of water on the moon.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wait, there's water on the moon?
Yes, there's water on the moon.
Oh yeah.
Researchers from Brown University just created the first quantitative map of water and its chemical building blocks on the moon. The water and the chemical building blocks, this was all measured from India's Chandrayaan-1 spacecraft when NASA's Moon Mineralogy Mapper flew aboard it. And they really just wanted to quantify it. And looking at this stuff, it's really only looking at the top couple of millimeters of the lunar topsoil. Additionally, it couldn't take into account areas that were hidden from view, so craters that were in shadow. People think that maybe there's water ice and lots more water in areas that maybe don't get a lot of sun. So these shadowed areas. So we don't know how deep water might go, or if there is, and how much would be trapped in these shadowed regions. But they have been able to determine that there is a lot of water on the moon, and that it increases in its distribution towards the poles. And based on what we understand about chemistry and the solar winds, scientists now believe that the water on the moon that they're looking at on the surface has been deposited there by solar winds, and also and chemical interactions that take place between the building blocks, hydrogen and oxygen in the form of hydroxyls. So we have not yet traversed areas that are high in water content, but this gives us a starting ground. And what the researchers say is that this is now we can start thinking about where we can go to really investigate the depth of the water on the moon, the extent of the water on the moon, and whether or not it's really worth it for us to try and go harvest water on the moon. Is the moon, when we go to the moon, are we going to go there with the intent to use the water on the moon to support our infrastructure? Is there enough there? That's where that's what we're getting at.
That's a ridiculous idea. Look, 70% or more of the planet is covered in water. There's enough water here already, people. Just got to get the salt out.
But if we go to the moon, as
how do
we
we
want to have we want to have a lunar outpost.
Oh.
If we go there, we're going to have to make water somehow. So, can we get it from the moon itself? Will we be able to harvest it from the surface of the moon? The quantities, though, to put it in perspective of how much water there actually is that they've got a maximum average of around 500 to 750 parts per million in the higher latitudes. That's less than is found in the sands of Earth's driest deserts. So it's not very much. It's like less than morning dew.
But again, this is why we need like a space elevator. I mean, like the whole thing of the expense of getting things from here to the moon as being the prohibitive thing of moving water to the moon is just because right now we use giant rockets and everything costs like 5 times its weight in gold to get it up there. A gallon of water is, I think, $18,000 to get into space. Something.
Well, really, all you need to do is bring just a little bit more than each person, and then you can just recycle fluids, right?
Wait, recycle the people?
No, like the fluids.
Huh? What?
Like the pee.
Wait, what?
Yes, the body fluids.
Just turn their pee back into water. Yeah.
Yeah. There are other areas that have higher than average concentrations of water on the moon. Near the moon's equator, there are lunar volcanic deposits, and it instead of coming from solar wind, these deposits are actually probably from within the moon's mantle and from erupted magma, which is cool. Multiple possibilities. So, water on the moon, it's there. There's a bit of it. There might be more. More investigation is needed. Now, I do think we have hit a certain fun time of the show. This is This Week in Science, everybody. Do you know what time it is?
Is it time?
It's time for Blair's Animal Corner.
She loves our creature, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. Wanna hear about animals? She's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
Oh, well, you know, guys, I'm really kind of tired.
Stop it.
Oh, I'm so tired right now. I know. You know how when you're really tired, you know, maybe you pull an all-nighter and then...
Why'd you make me yawn?
And then before you know it, it's the next day. And you're like, okay, I gotta just get my day started. And the adrenaline and a whole bunch of coffee, and you make it all the way through your day on zero sleep. And then finally you collapse on your bed and you have the deepest, heaviest, longest sleep you've had in a long time. Yes. So this is actually a known phenomenon with mammals and a lot of other animals where you actually end up kind of catching up. You have this sleep pressure that builds up while you stay awake when normally circadian rhythms tell you to sleep. If you're awake too long and you experience sleep deprivation, you build up this sleep pressure. Next sleep, you sleep deeper, longer. That's called sleep rebound. So researchers wanted to look at how sleep rebound is influenced by different external factors. So researchers from Imperial College of London wanted to look at this in, you know, the classic study animal, the fruit fly. They say besides being a great genetic model, it's also easier for us to study effects of sleep rebound in flies, as we have automatic equipment that can monitor thousands of them. Human trials rely on people reporting their own sleep, which can be unreliable. So watching the fruit flies, you really get to see exactly what's happening. There's no kind of bias from reporters. So what they found, what they wanted to do is they wanted to see how the brain can affect sleep pressure and sleep rebound. And how did they do that? They did that by arousing the flies. So they had fruit flies. They kept them awake for 24 hours, and then they presented them with a virgin female. So they were in glass tubes. They were allowed to acclimatize to the tubes, and then either a male, a virgin female, either a male or a virgin female was introduced to the glass tube, and both of those introductions resulted in keeping them awake for 24 hours. So they missed a whole sleep cycle. After the intruder was removed, the males who had been invaded by another male had normal rebound sleep. They slept deeper and harder because they were just stressed out by this dude in their space. But then the males who had been paired with a female did not make up for lost sleep. They had a normal night's sleep. So, so they did not experience rebound sleep. They did not have built up sleep pressure. When males and females were first introduced.
So for some reason, their bodies were like not as tired.
Right. They were not as tired. Their body didn't tell them they needed extra sleep.
They were on arousal Adderall.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. They slept normal. But yeah, they didn't sleep heavy. They didn't feel, you know, the best conclusion I could draw is that they didn't feel like they missed sleep, right? That's the way that I would phrase it. That's their body didn't act like it missed sleep, right?
Wow.
So when the males and females were introduced, when they brought in the virgin females, this wasn't just pent-up frustration, because they actually all copulated within the first 30 minutes. So the virgin females were deflowered promptly. After that, the females usually didn't engage in sexual activity again. They were done. But the males continued to try and court them, spending more than half of the next 23 hours trying to court these females, to no avail. But they also discovered that there were some sex pheromones that were left behind by the females, and that also may have had to do with keeping the males somewhat awake. So this is what they've been able to draw here. First of all, the pheromones are inhibiting sleep cycles somehow.
Yeah. And inhibiting sleep cycles, but also keeping the males stimulated enough so that that sleep pressure is not building up. So the sleep pressure, I'm going to anthropomorphize a little bit, but basically that's, you're not sleeping, and your body has metabolites that are building up that need to be cleaned out. I think this is a main idea of sleep, is that we sleep so that our brains can consolidate memories and kind of do housekeeping on the neurons, right? That our body can kind of refresh itself, rebuild things, put things back together so you can wake up the next day refreshed and ready to go. And so whatever's going on at the neural level for activation, what's happening to the metabolites? What's happening to their brains?
So that is the huge question now. This opens up an entire field of questions asking about sleep. Dr. Gillestro, the main researcher on this piece of research, says sleep is a fundamental process for all animals, and many of the results the community has obtained with fruit flies have been replicated in other animals, including mammals and humans. But now, and I'm going to paraphrase,
how are they going to do this study in humans?
Oh God, I can't even. They're going to make them sniff t-shirts. I don't know. But to paraphrase, this kind of calls the entire idea of regenerative sleep and the need for sleep into question. Because if all it takes is a brain signal from a pheromone and you're satiated, you don't need sleep anymore, this kind of throws everything topsy-turvy on what we know about sleep.
So I'd want to see this study done on different ages of flies, different ages of male flies. So is there a difference between young, fertile, nubile males and older, a little more decrepit, I got to use my cane flies, you know?
Experienced.
Of a ripe 1.5 days old. Yes.
Exactly. Ripe old age of a day and a half. So different ages, and also for a longer time span. So can they keep it up?
Right.
How long can that arousal last with no detrimental effects?
Right. And is there a
limit?
Yeah. And is there a certain point where there's detrimental effects, or is there a certain point where they have to have that extra hard sleep at some point, the sleep rebound? Does that eventually kick in? Yeah. Yeah. So fruit flies and their arousal have taught us a lot about sleep, it turns out.
So my analogy for sleep is this: if you could just go to sleep tonight and leave everything, leave the dishes in the sink, leave the laundry on the floor, leave the garbage piling up, and you'd wake up tomorrow and it's all done. The dishes were washed and they're back in the cupboard. The trash there's a new liner in the trash bin in the house, and the rest of it was taken out. The laundry has all been washed and folded. This is what sleep does for your brain, right? And so, the longer you're awake and haven't allowed the fairies to come in and, finish the shoemaker's job or whatever, these things pile up, they build up. Sleep does all these things for you. It allows your brain to take out the trash. And that's all you got to do is sleep. And sometimes if enough trash builds up, you're going to need to sleep a little longer because they got more work to do. They're going to put a little bit more of the sleep pixie dust over you.
Right,
Keep you knocked out longer
But
so they can
but
finish all
then
the chores.
how does see this is the big question. What happens when you don't do that and you don't act like you need it?
Yeah, what happens at what point? So what's happening basically in this state? These flies are getting super aroused and their laundry is staying folded. The
Yeah.
pixies are coming in and doing something even though they haven't closed their eyes to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
that is the question. How is that possible? And is there at some point a detrimental payback that will happen?
Maybe arousal equals sleep.
And so the interesting question here is like, so what they say here is like, so there are other biological drives that can maybe modulate
Right.
that
Right.
that's need for sleep. And
Yeah.
if this is the case, what I am excited about, if it applies to people, so we've been hearing forever about, oh, you need to go to bed at the same time every night. This, we know that shift work is really bad for people. But if we can figure this out, can we make it better for shift workers? Can we assuage the fears of the weekend party warriors who like to stay up all night long? Is there, people might be like, oh, what am I doing to myself by staying up all night on Saturday nights?
Or
if
you're finding yourself having to pick
so we provide
sex or sleep. Sex or sleep. Maybe, it's one and the same.
We provide shift workers with pornography. Right. No, I mean, like I don't think it's that outlandish of an idea to think that being aroused or being concentrated on sex actually resting a good part of the human brain. That kind of makes sense. Like a lot of the rest of the brain is shut off, not being activated, not being required to run any information through it.
Yeah, but remember, these flies only had sex once in 24 hours, and they spent the other 23 hours trying to get sex and failed.
Yeah.
Well, it's still arousal. It was that activation.
Yeah, so they were aroused. They were not actively
still sex in the last 24 hours, Blair.
Yes, but it was very
not
short.
Bad. Well, this is the part of the conversation that will be removed from the podcast.
Anyway.
Yeah, we have actually left the subject matter.
Anyway.
We have left the subject matter. Let's get back to the animal corner.
I have one more very quick story, but very earth-shattering. Octopuses and other cephalopods have one ability that is astounding, amazing, and fascinating, and that is their ability to change colors at the blink of an eye. Their amazing pigment cells can do this kind of crazy color change to communicate with each other, to blend in with environments, to look like other animals. It's fantastic. And there's been a lot of research trying to figure out exactly how they get this. A new piece of research from Peking University looked at reflectin, which is a protein that exists exclusively in cephalopods and is responsible for structural color changes that help them easily blend in surrounding environments or send warning signals. This research, long story short, it looks like this reflectin came from a symbiotic bioluminescent bacteria called Vibrio fischeri, and they think this is all a case of horizontal gene transfer.
Really?
Yes.
Horizontal gene transfer in a higher organism.
Yes.
We've talked about it in bacteria. We've talked about it in plants. There's been inklings.
Right.
Yeah, but wow, really? Okay, tell me more.
Well, that's pretty much all of it for now. It's very preliminary, but they were looking at, this was 5 years of research. I don't know how preliminary, but this is the very first inklings of this information. They traced the origin of reflectin, the gene responsible for reflectin, back to a transposon from the symbiotic bioluminescent bacterium. So the implication here is that horizontal gene transfer, this event, introduced the reflectin gene into ancient cephalopods. And they can also, from this 5-year research, find an actual hierarchical, that's such a great word, hierarchical structure of reflectin protein.
I can't say that word either.
So that some chemical modules and neurotransmitters create this ability for reflectin to form, but the team also found that self-assembly and higher order assembly in reflectin originated from a core repeating octopeptide, which is from this symbiotic bacteria. They've named it a protopeptide, although octopeptide sounds perfect because, octopuses. But anyway, there's a lot of smoking guns here that lead us to believe that this could be all from horizontal gene transfer. It's not been 100% confirmed yet, but it's all signs are pointing to this one bacteria.
One symbiotic bacteria.
Yeah.
Well, I love the idea of this being something that was to an ancient cephalopod. I mean, when we've talked about like the genes that we carry in our DNA, we don't talk about it, an ancient hominin and gene transfer. It's like, this happened at some point when we were just early multicellular creatures.
Right.
Long, long ago, not when you were a fully formed organism. So I love the idea that this could have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a ancient cephalopod.
Thanks, bacteria.
Yeah.
For giving
Which
us
then
pretty colorful cephalopods.
What weird stuff do we have in our genome from bacteria? I'm sure there's a bunch of it.
Right? How much horizontal? I want to know more. How much horizontal gene transfer is happening on a regular basis?
I've heard lots of hypotheses about this.
Yeah.
But this is fascinating.
Yeah. This is cool. Cool. Chemistry, biology, all coming together in the cephalopods. And now I'd like to talk about squirrels. Squirrels are nuts. Squirrels like nuts. I know Blair loves squirrels, so she loves this part of the conversation. This story is out of UC Berkeley. So it's a near and dear to our hearts kind of story. Researchers from UC Berkeley published in the Royal Society Open Science Journal their research looking at fox squirrels and how they remember where they hide things. So fox squirrels are not larder hoarders. And larder hoarders are the kind of hoarders that take all their nuts and they put them in one place. The larder, where they can always go back to it. No, fox squirrels are scatter hoarders, which means they're hiding these things all over the place. They get an acorn, they get a different kind of nut, they're putting it all over the place. And they hide some 3,000 to 10,000 nuts a year. So it turns out, according to Mikkel Delgado and Lucia Jacobs from UC Berkeley, that this is the first demonstration of chunking in a scatter hoarding animal. And it suggests that squirrels use flexible strategies to store food depending on how they acquire that food.
Chunking, you say?
Yeah. What is chunking, you might say? We do it when we say, try and remember a phone number. Instead of remembering each individual number in a phone number separately, in that order, you chunk them into small chunks. So you remember the first 3 digits as the area code, the next 3 digits as the next 3 digits, and then the last 4 digits. And maybe those last 4 digits you split into 2 digits and 2 digits. But those are chunks of information. And so they found that by giving these squirrels different opportunities to take food and different kinds of food, they found that if they gave the squirrels always the food in the same place, the squirrels would take and hide the food and organize it by type. So they basically took all the almonds and hid all the almonds kind of in the same general area. The pecans ended up in a different general area. Peanuts in a different general area. So it was like they were organizing their refrigerators with different nut drawers. But if the researchers always gave the squirrels their food from different locations, not from a central location, but from different locations, then the squirrels, the strategy they used was only to not hide it where they had hidden something before. So basically, when they hid something, the researchers would then give them a new thing near that location where they had hidden something. And then the squirrels would be like, I can't hide something. I just got something. I got to go hide it someplace else. And so they'd go to a different location. So based on how they got the food, the squirrels hid the food differently. They either scattered it based on, I'm not putting it there again, or they organized it based on category. They categorized their nuts. Squirrels are nuts.
Their brains work pretty similar to ours. I mean, they're mammal brains, and we love to categorize things.
I know.
It's how we learn.
It is, but it's so interesting. This is the first time that this kind of chunking behavior has been attributed to another animal doing this kind of scatter hoarding. I mean,
What a yucky word for that.
Scatter hoarding or chunking?
Chunking.
Chunking. It's chunks. Chunks. Squirrels got chunks of memory. Nut chunks? No. Anyway.
No.
No. Yeah. So anyway, it's a pretty fun, pretty neat study. Very interesting glimpse into the squirrel brain. And as much as you don't like squirrels, you got to admit it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. They're wily. It explains even more why they're so untrustworthy. They remember where things are. They know who to bother.
Untrustworthy. Oh my goodness.
And they know where they've hidden their nuts.
And they know where they've hidden things before. I think that is, yeah, that's another big one. Is they're remembering.
Wily.
Yeah.
They adapt
Good
their
memories.
behavior. They're wily. Can't be trusted.
All right, 2 more quick stories, and then Justin gets to do one. Skin cells were directly converted into motor neurons. Now, you might say, what? We've talked about skin cells being turned into induced pluripotent stem cells and then turned into motor neurons. We're doing this all the time. But this is important because what it allows researchers to do is in a dish, not take the cell back to embryonic stage, to young age. Basically, one of the researchers at this study out of Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, what he says is that when you go back through the pluripotent stem cell phase, which is like going way back, it's like demolishing a house and building a new one from the ground up. What we're doing is more like renovation. We change the interior, but leave the original structure, which retains the characteristics of the aging adult neurons that we want to study. And so this is going to allow researchers to actually study diseases that relate to neurodegeneration in the cells of patients who are going through those neurodegenerative processes in real time. And so basically the idea is that you can really take a patient's cells and figure out what's going on in their brains or in their motor neurons. Take the skins and you can't take motor neurons out of a living human being. So instead you can take a biopsy, a skin sample, and turn those cells now directly into motor neurons that can tell you a lot more about what is going on in the nervous system of that living human being.
Neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, take some skin. I'm covered in it.
That's right. I got it. You go ahead. Motor neuron away. Put them in a dish. Yes. It's a very exciting advancement. And then also, I mean, years ago, back in the early 2000s, I was early in graduate school when the hormone replacement therapy study came out saying, don't take hormone replacement therapy if you are a postmenopausal woman because it could lead to heart attacks and stroke and increased estrogen levels, or leading to increased numbers of stroke in women. And there's a new study out published in JAMA. This study looked at 27,347 women who were randomized. Mortality follow-up was available for more than 98%. They did an 18-year follow-up, counting the number of deaths in either a hormone therapy group or a placebo group. And the end result is among postmenopausal women, hormone therapy with conjugated equine estrogens.
Oh boy. Horse estrogen.
Yeah, plus medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is a form of progesterone, for a median of 5.6 years, or with the horse estrogens alone for a median of 7.2 years, was not associated with risk of all-cause cardiovascular or cancer mortality during a cumulative follow-up of 18 years. The end result is menopausal hormone therapy for 5 to 7 years in the study was not associated with the risk of long-term all-cause mortality. So this is good news for women and doctors who have been interested in the use of hormone replacement therapy, but have been scared away from it. Short-term use of the therapy could be positive. Talk to your doctors. It's just a study. All right, Justin, that's it for me. What's your story?
Embedded connectivity, where any object can communicate some sort of relevant information wirelessly with low power to another object or readout of some sort that would take that information and do something useful with it. Like a sports jersey that alerts the coach that an athlete has precipitated beyond good hydration, a headband monitoring heart rate, a fireproof jacket that alerts you when it is about to fail, shoes that tell you it's time to change your socks. Yes, it's a vision of a world so bold and currently so bulky that it doesn't exist right now. But with a less bulky, bold vision on the near horizon, University of Washington researchers have demonstrated for the first time that devices that run on almost zero power can transmit data across distances of up to 2.8 kilometers, which of course is, for those not familiar with kilometers, approximately 2,800 meters, breaking the long-held barrier and potentially enabling a vast array of interconnected devices. So today's sort of flexible electronics, something that's like a wearable electronic, can't employ a really big battery and need to operate with very low power typically. And so they can usually talk to something else that's maybe a few feet or a few meters away. This kind of limits their practical applications. University of Washington's long-range backscatter system uses reflected radio signals to transmit data at extremely low power and low cost. They've achieved reliable coverage throughout a 4,800 square foot house, office area that covered 41 rooms, and a 1 acre vegetable farm. Quotey voice. Until now, devices that can communicate over long distances have consumed a lot of power. The trade-off in a lower power device that consumes microwatts of power is that the communication range is short, says Shyam Golakota, lead faculty and associate professor in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering. Now we've shown that we can offer both, which will be pretty game-changing for a lot of different industries and applications. So to put this in perspective, this is the range that they've achieved here. It's not so much that the range, because we can communicate with like satellites that are orbiting distant planets, but you know, those are nuclear powered, those probes. They did this range with 1,000 times less power than all existing technologies capable of transmitting data over those similar distances. So the real superpower isn't in the range, it's in the amount of power that they used to transmit that information. And
Awesome.
Yeah, and I sort of made up in the lead into the story. shoes that tell you your socks are sweaty and should be changed, right? And it's sort of like I was trying to think of what flexible wearable things or what sort of low energy devices would you need to do that communication? And I couldn't really come up with any. One of the I could come up with
anything for health monitoring, something that could be taking, your not maybe not your blood pressure, but your pulse, your heart rate, monitoring your body temperature.
Right. The one that I did come up with was like a one of those like those fake heart thingies, right? Or something, some sort of embedded device within a body. Something that's
the battery level of your pacemaker.
Right, the pacemaker, but also like something much smaller that is a stent that's keeping an artery open and signaling that it's structurally failing, and being able to tell, not a device that you're wearing on your neck or on the side of your head, but being able to relay that somewhere in in the room at large and have an alert show up on your phone as a result. One of the examples I used is you could for a flexible knee brace, you could it could transmit the range of mobility for that knee to a doctor or something like that name. But this is like,
and then it can be used by spies.
Oh, right. Then it gets hacked and your knee does weird things that you didn't intend it to do.
Right. Transmitting information about, I don't know, something. Never mind.
Right. But then you can take it out to a broader context and even look at something like the Wi-Fi device that you now have plugged into your wall, right? If you're able to transmit information over less power, ultimately it could mean a lot of our wireless devices could at some point be using a lot less electricity. It's less
or have longer ranges for the same amount of power.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's an interesting system. I don't know how much further it goes, but yeah.
Cool.
A thousand times less power required for the range that they achieved versus what was previously existing.
I can't wait to see these things in application soon.
Well, and with wireless charging, even when it starts to run out, you might still be able to charge it remotely.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a whole thing. Then you've got, that sort of passive charging of a car driving on electric car driving on a highway, and it's charging up because it can transmit information, which is also energy. So it's just transmitting energy.
But this is basically communication. This isn't energy. I mean, this is
correct.
Right.
Yes,
but there are
in the form of electromagnetic signals, but
that's something you would need to figure out. So even though it uses 1,000 times less.
It uses
it
less
still
power.
uses something, and you're still going to need to either replace it or recharge it at some point.
Possibly, but this is the kind of thing like we've been talking about batteries. This is like batteries being needed for things because we've been talking about maybe bacterial batteries that we could build, but they don't produce that much power, so they're not really good for applications yet. So maybe this is an application, that we could use these low power energy sources to power these low power needing devices. Yeah. Bacteria powering this communications device that potentially, helps doctors to keep you healthier or whatever. Yeah. Many
that's
interesting
very cool.
ideas. Yeah. Many interesting ideas will probably come from this. This is very, very, very interesting. Oh, have we done it, you guys?
We did it.
2 hours and we are good. We are good. What a great show tonight. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of This Week in Science. Thank you to our chat room for watching this whole time. Thank you for everyone who helps us out on This Week in Science. Fada, Brandon, Identity 4, and others. Thank you very much for your assistance. We could not do this without you. And now I'd like to thank our Patreon sponsors. I'd like to say thank you to Paul Disney, G. Burton Lattimore, John Ratnaswamy, Richard Onomus, Byron Lee, E.O., Kevin Parachan, Jacqueline Boystern, Tyron Fong, Andy Groh, Keith Corsell, Jake Jones, Gerald Sorrells, Chris Clark, Richard Hendricks, Charlene Henry, Brian Hendrick, John Gridley, Stephen Bickle, Kevin Railsback, Ulysses Adkins, Dave Friedel, Jay Verandel, Bob Calder, Mark Mazzaros, Edward Dyer, Trainer 84, Layla Marshall Clark, Larry Garcia, Randy Mazuka, Tony Steele, General Onyago, Steve DeBell, Louis Smith, the Harden Family, IFSHMN, Greg Guthman, Patrick Cohn, Ksenia Volkova, Daryl Huron-Zerang, Alex Wilson, Jason Schneiderman, Dave Neighbor, Jason Dozier, Matthew Litwin, Eric Knapp, Jason Roberts, Richard Porter, Rodney, David Wiley, Robert Aston, Sir Frankadelic, Christopher Rappin, Dana Pearson, Paul Stanton, David Brendan Minish, Dale Bryant, Todd Northcutt, Marlene Moss, Bill Kersey, Ben Rothig, Darwin Hanning, Rudy Garcia, Felix Alvarez, Brian Hone, Orly Radio, Brian Condon, Mark, Nathan Greco, Hexator, Mitch Neves, Flying Out, John Crocker, Christopher Dreyer, Audiam Chiwada, Dave Wilkinson, Steve Mushinsky, Rich Gramos, Gary Swinsberg, Phil Nadeau, Braxton Howard, Sal Good Sam, Matt Sutter, Emma Grenier, Philip Shane, James Dobson, Kurt Larson, Stefan Insama, Honey Moss, Mountain Sloth, Jim Popove, Jason Olds, James Paul West, Alec Doty, Luma Lama, Joe Wheeler, Dougal Campbell, Craig Porter, Adam Mishkan, Aaron Luthen, Marjorie, David Simile, Tyler Harrison, and Colombo Ahmed.
Wow, that was a really fast, clean take.
Yeah. Thank you for all your support on Patreon. And if you're interested in supporting us, you can find information at patreon.com/thisweekinscience. Also, remember that you can help us out simply by telling your friends about TWIS. It's so easy. Just tell some people about us. It helps us so much when new people find us and start listening and watching. On next week's show, we will be back once again with more great science news, broadcasting live online at 8 p.m. Pacific time on twis.org/live, where you can watch and join our chat room. But don't worry if you miss it live. Past episodes are always available. twis.org/YouTube, facebook.com/thisweekinscience, and twis.org.
Thank you for enjoying the show. TWIS is also available as a podcast. You can simply Google This Week in Science in anything iTunes. Or if you have a mobile type device, you can search for TWIS, the number 4 Droid app in the Android marketplace, or simply This Week in Science in anything Apple marketplacey.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes will be available on our website. That's at www.twis.org, where you can also make comments and start conversations with the hosts and other listeners.
Or you can contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or Blair at blairbaz@twis.org. You have to put TWIS in the subject line, though. TWIS. Otherwise, your emails will be spam filtered into oblivion. You can also hit us up on the Twitter, where we are at TWIScience, at Dr. Kiki, at JacksonFly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes to you in the night, please let us know.
We will be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
Oh. And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. This week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth, and I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just better understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. And This Week in science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got a laundry list of items I want to address. From stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say. And if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.
All right, it's the after show, and Blair's got a funny picture of herself on a polo horse.
What are you talking about? This is how I always look.
I know, always poloing around.
Yeah, that was me.
It's you poloing around.
You know how I just can't stop talking about polo. Oh my goodness.
Wow, did you know that the guy who's the voice actor for Squidward on SpongeBob SquarePants, his last name is Bumpass?
No.
I mean, maybe it's not pronounced that way. Bumpass? Bumpass. Bumpus.
Bumpus?
Bumpus? I did not know. Did you know that at Comic-Cons, voice actors get paid for their autographs? Amazing.
That's cool.
Cool, I didn't know. I missed seeing Weird Al Yankovic.
It's Portland Comic-Con right now?
It was this last weekend. Rose City Comic-Con. Brett Spiner was there.
Oh.
Katie Sackhoff. Who else was there? Rose McIver, who I love from iZombie. Who else was there? Pearl Mackie. She was in Doctor Who. Felicia Day was there. And Peter Capaldi. Man. Oh, and Carl Urban. Oh, I like Carl Urban. McCoy. Bones from the new Star Trek. Yeah, so I got to speak on a panel at Rose City Comic-Con.
That's so cool.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit the computer. I didn't mean to do that. So yeah, my friend Jessica Hebert, who we interviewed about placentas.
Oh yeah,
she's a con type of girl, type of lady.
But she's a pirate.
She's a pirate. She's also kind of a geek music creator, aficionado. And so she was already, she had already put together a petition to do a panel about geek music at the con. And then she found out about the future track. And the future track had a bunch of science stuff in it, which I didn't know was a thing. at the Rose City Comic Con.
Comic-Con's expanding in a lot of cities to be things other than
Yeah. But what this
Comic-Con
means
is known for.
is that I can try and make a This Week in Science panel
Yes.
for next year, maybe.
Yes.
Right?
That would be so
Right?
amazing.
We could do a Comic-Con thing. I mean, maybe, or, let's do something on do a panel on podcasting, or see if we can do a live podcast somewhere, or I don't know. I'm having ideas. But we will
There's a
see
lot
when
of
next year comes about. We'll see. It's here in Portland, so why not, right?
We've talked about a lot of things on the show that are like originally based in science fiction that are now real.
Yes.
So, I mean, you could fill an entire hour with that easily. Like just talking about tricorders, you could fill an hour.
I guess, but I've got the challenge. I've got the challenge that I could lay out at an Comic-Con, which I'll go ahead and do right now.
What?
You can have any superpower that you want. It can be yours right now, as long as nobody has ever had it before in any comic book.
Right.
That is, I have found. I laid this out with some, I would call them comic nerds. And they were unable to come up with anything that hasn't been tried before. Isn't there in some form already?
Yeah. I wonder. I can't wait to discover what things are still to come.
Oh my god.
What powers have not been made up in
They've
comic
all
books
been
or
done.
science
That's the
fiction?
thing. We're at the point.
Have all of them?
We're at the point where.
Is it all done? Is there nothing new?
No, but also, I mean, I would argue what you're just saying is there are no new ideas, which is a fair thing to talk about. But what I really think is particularly interesting about science fiction is that it puts people in a space where they are specifically dreaming up scenarios based on a probable future. And so it's different because it's not just that, you put enough monkeys in a room and they'll type out Shakespeare sort of thing, but it's actually it's an exercise to explore potential futures.
Panoramic sinus girl, the ability to fight allergies, dust, pollen, and crime.
I like that.
So what you're saying, Blair, like a lot of it is putting us into a sort of foreseeable future, and rolling with it, and playing out sort of current day scenarios with this new future world that we inherit. A show that just started, I'm already a huge fan of, is The Orville. If you haven't seen it, it's
what is it?
Seth MacFarlane. He did like the Family Guy.
Oh yeah, I've heard about it. Yeah,
it's a complete, total Star Trek knockoff.
Yeah,
and it is brilliant. It is just. I mean, a lot of the gags are so far. It's one episode. There's a whole bunch more. It's going to be coming out every Sunday. A lot of the gags, some of them are sort of like, they're like, okay, that was obvious. But they're obvious only because the punchline has pre-existed in sci-fi all along, but nobody ever pulled the trigger on it. And he's pulling the trigger on all of them.
right.
Like there's like my favorite chortle laugh. It was actually in a trailer for it. But it's still my favorite part of what he's creating is the alien ship comes up on viewer, and they've got it, they put them on the view screen. They got to have this negotiation dialogue to, get through this next part of the confrontation with the alien spacecraft. Only the alien is sitting way to the side of center of the screen. It's like over here. And so before they start talking, he's like, "If I'm sorry. If you could just to your right, take one step. Just one just yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, you were out of the middle of the frame. It was just totally throwing me off. Okay, go." Like, and he comes up on the viewer and it's just like way over here. It's like, yeah, just one step to your left. Yeah. Okay. We're good. Like he's playing the minutia of all those things that were overlooked because they were staged perfectly for us throughout all sci-fi, and he's delving into those. Anyway, it's a great show. I'm already a big fan of it.
I haven't seen it yet. I can't wait to watch it. It sounds awesome.
It's stupid good.
I like stupid good. In fact, I love stupid good. I'm a big fan of stupid good.
Yeah.
So many ways. Oh, we had a really long show tonight, you guys. And
I think I don't know. Did we? I feel like this is now par for the course. I think the 2-hour show is just like a thing now.
well, when we have a guest on for an interview, definitely, because I have a hard time cutting back the science for the second half of the show, which is if you have a 45-minute interview, then you have to cut back the science or the discussion of the science.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then that's like, okay, but then I don't know.
Ed says, sorry, the Orville pilot was 30 minutes. I will never get back. I don't know, Ed. There was gems in there. The device that did that sort of simple seeming thing that like did have this other huge consequence if it fell into the wrong hands, and the way they utilized a planted plot thing to use it as a counter.
WI guy didn't like it either.
Yeah, I think you really got to like Seth MacFarlane. Like,
I think so, but
he's a polarizing individual.
It's too late to eat chocolate.
No, it's never too late to eat chocolate.
Right. Never. It's delicious chocolate. Also,
the only reason I'm not eating chocolate right now is that I brush my teeth.
I haven't brushed my teeth.
It is stupid, why guy? It is stupid, but it's stupid enough to be, I think, good and funny, not because it can't be good and funny because it's so stupid.
And you know what? Fair trade.
Ooh, lemon ginger. Oh my goodness.
Pepper. With black pepper.
Wow.
It's really good.
I wonder if Lady Vikings like their chocolate as much as
you want Lady Viking chocolate.
Oh, that would be good.
That would taste sweaty.
Man. I totally missed the opportunity to wear my funny Viking hat with the light up horns.
Aww.
Oh well.
Oh
yeah, Ed, that interview is not going to get edited for the KDVS radio show. It's going to be all of our discussion. The science news stories are going to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The podcast will be pretty much 2 hours long. I think I will cut out part of the conversation about fruit fly sex.
Yes, that's fair.
The part that wasn't really about fruit fly sex.
Yep. I agree with that decision. Hey, I mean,
podcast listeners don't need it.
It's. I think it is a great gift. First of all, that 90 to 95% of the stuff that we say is worth keeping. I consider that a great compliment. But the other thing is, it is really great to be able to go, I'm just going to trim that a little bit.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't have gone that way.
That's great. No, we're trying to make content people actually want to listen to.
Yeah.
It needs to be salacious.
I appreciate the critical ear. I think it's fantastic.
Yes. Someone has to have a critical ear.
One of the benefits of being part of the live audience is to get out, hear all the salacious bits that we decided we went too far.
Right? You hear all the things that maybe we should. Yeah, the cutting room floor. Exactly.
It's kind of like the beauty, though, of doing a live show without a tremendous amount of planning or pre-censoring of what we're going to say, is that you do get to hear a lot of rambling that just follows the conversation wherever it leads.
Oh boy. And that's a good thing you're
And-
saying?
No, I think it's a great thing for the live audience to be able to participate in that. And it's like sort of getting behind the scenes. Like, who was it?
As an editor, it makes me a little upset on Thursdays when I go to edit. I'm like, "Ugh, I'm just gonna cut off the last half hour of the show.
Yeah, and I'm thinking it's Woody Allen, but I think Woody Allen was saying somebody else did this and he doesn't. But it was something like a good filmmaker films 10 times what actually shows up on the screen.
Oh, that was Scorsese, right?
Right. Okay. So that's Scorsese. And then I think it was Woody Allen said, I try to cut that down to 3. I don't have the patience. Like, but it was him talking about it that got, this is how I heard this. But yeah, okay. So it's like Scorsese shoots like 10 times what you see, because then it's pure gold, because they finally got the scene right, the dialogue went off right, whatever it is, finally came through properly in one of 10 versions of them doing it. What you always get here is the only version that we have to offer you. So if you like it, it's because we're 10 times as good as Scorsese. That's how you have to. That's the math. I think that's how that works.
Sure.
Yeah, right, exactly, bleak. But that doesn't work for me. It just makes me paranoid or I fall asleep. So yeah, that wouldn't work necessarily. Oh, Identity 4 says I went to a live SGU, that's Skeptic's Guide to the Universe show a few years ago. It was shocking how much those shows get edited down for the podcast. Yeah, right. See, maybe I should be I should cut the show down seriously to only like the podcast. Oh, here's maybe
5
what
minutes.
we should do.
5 minutes.
No, the podcast is going to be, so here's the thing. I'm going to edit the podcast to always be only 45 minutes.
Wow.
That's it. I'll edit down to 45 minutes. And that'll be it. And then people
How will people even know that I'm part of the show?
Because you're always talking over Kiki, so people will have to
but
know.
all of that will, oh yeah. So I need to keep talking over to people.
Justin.
I need to talk over people just to get my voice
Right.
on the show.
But I want to hear the rest of Kiki. So
But-
you're gonna narrow it down to 45, and then there was a second half of that.
Oh, yeah. And then what we'll do is we'll make a second podcast feed that only goes out through Patreon to Patreon sponsors. And it is the entire show.
And then you're getting me. Look at me telling stories.
But people will pay for you. That's the thing, Justin. It's going to be the podcast freebie might not have you in it, but people who want you are going to pay for it.
Yeah, I'm the draw. We're in trouble. So you ever hear that tagline? But they don't even say it anymore. But you hear the laugh tracks behind TV shows, and then once in a while they'll say, "Filmed before a live television audience," right? Even those shows sometimes do the show 3 times. For a live audience, they do it 3 times, and then they edit up which ones went over better, which ones they executed better, or the audience reacted better to. And then sometimes the audience that you hear laughing has nothing to do with the show. This is always something that freaks me out when my kids are watching I'm not going to say the network, but watching a kid show with a laugh track. Any kid show with a laugh track. Laugh tracks tend to be adults. 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever adult ages there are, laughing at something. And I'm like always pointing out to my daughter, it's like, do you notice this like kid joke just got laughed at, like guffawed at by a bunch of people who sound like they're 40 years old? Like, isn't that weird? Like, it's not an audience of kids that they could pull out of school to create the laugh track. It's a bunch of adults who thought that throwaway comment was hilarious. Like,
sure,
no,
they did.
They hit a button that's a recording of people laughing at something completely different and put it to what you're watching. and it actually ruined, I think, my daughter's ability to watch certain shows because now she hears the laugh track. Like before, she never heard the laugh track, but now she hears the laugh track and goes,
killed it.
like, oh, they made that sound funny by laughing, huh? Like, exactly. No, but they did this thing in school where they looked at 3 things that take place in writing, and I connected the dots between that and things that she watches. But when you read something, you can usually fit it into 3 categories. One is informative, which is, I think, what we do. We do informative broadcasts. Another is entertainment, which we sprinkle into this, maybe, or we just by happenstance. And another is persuasive, right? So these are the 3 main things that you're going to encounter when you read something. It's an informative piece that you're reading, it's an entertaining piece that you're reading, or it's a persuasion piece that you're reading. And so, like, I connected it to the TV watching. So she can now identify and will tell me when she's watching something that's a persuasion, which is all commercials, right? That, oh, they're telling me, they're trying to convince me that, and oh, this looks informative because they showed like a digestive tract, but they're trying to persuade me that this, if I take this product, I'll get rid of my acid reflux, whatever that is. Or this is just purely for entertainment. Like, they're not like trying to be informative or convince me of anything. They're just trying to get me to laugh. If you look at every kind of media that you encounter, just from those 3 little lenses or these 3 little categories, and force them into one of them, I think you'll find that a lot of the conversation that you feel like you're engaged in society can be boiled down into that, right? Somebody's trying to inform, entertain, or convince, or excuse me, persuade. And what do we do?
I don't know. We do a combination of all of them, I think.
I think we do a heavy amount of informative.
Heavy informative, though. Mainly informative.
Mainly informative.
Yeah.
I think I think our entertainment factor has a lot more to do with the fact that the way we're approaching the informative isn't an entertaining thing. Like,
right. It's our approach.
Not we're doing it to entertain, but that we have an entertaining approach to the informative, which is sort of a blend of like your concentric circles. Yeah. And we do some persuasive. Like, there is an element of our show where we're like, okay, if you've bought into any of the Kool-Aid on global warming, here's why it's not Kool-Aid, which is persuasion, right? But it's also just informative, right? So it's like hard to tell sometimes. Like these things.
Well, so this is the problem too, is that like anti-science is persuasive.
Correct.
And when you try to fight a persuasive argument with
purely informative,
it doesn't always work,
right.
Which is part of the problem that we've had with things like climate change, is that scientists bring a pipette to a gunfight, right? So I think that's part of something that in all of my science communication, training that I've had, and in the time that we've spent doing this, you learn how to present information in a persuasive way or in an entertaining way. So you're still being informative. You're not bringing untruths. You're not bringing anything in the guise of doing something else. But you're using a vocabulary perhaps that is more consistent with a different communication form.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a weird thing right now because you can find support of literally anything on the internet, which, some parts of the internet are fantastic. We have access to things we've never had access to before, but it also creates a lot of echo chambers. So
right, but that's what America is. And this is
it's definitely stronger than it's ever been, though, with the internet, because
I disagree.
If you're the only person that believes in chemtrails in your neighborhood, you have no one to talk to unless you have the internet.
Okay. but and this is not an argument that I created, but it's one I came across recently that I kind of like buy into a little bit, which is that the whole idea of America is the freedom to believe what you want. And
you can believe what you want, but people don't have to talk to you.
And you also don't have to act on it. Like, if you want to talk about believing whatever you want, there have been some people with some beliefs that are pretty upsetting running around. And just because you believe in something doesn't mean you can act on it.
Well, okay, but
so be careful with that.
No, this is what I mean though. Like, this took a different slant on what I think about America in terms of our freedoms and our liberties and our freedom from religion. Everything else is that part of what made America an attractive place to come to in the early stages of the post-colony world was that, I mean, we think of it as freedom from religion or freedom of your religion, right? But in a way, that's also saying freedom to believe anything you want. And there's not an authority built into America that tells you, no, you're wrong. This is the way the world is. This is how things are. This is the way it is. And part of that freedom of religion, from religion, of ideology that comes with America is the ability to believe in absolute bullshit. I just shut down here. Sorry.
You said bad words.
I know. But there is like that is kind of ingrained into the American like thing of the freedom, which is that you don't have to accept somebody else's definition of how the world works, how the universe works. And I think for the early deists, that freedom was liberating. And I think in our modern day era of all the internets being able to put out any kind of nonsense and people seeking it out and chemtrail believers, the whole whatever it is, as repugnant as some of it is, you also have to acknowledge that's kind of what America is. America's, as this experiment of society, is always going to have the ability and the freedom to have really false beliefs, because it almost encourages you to define reality on your own terms. And it's a concept of America that I'm kind of new to in thinking of it and looking at it as. So I can't like argue about the pros and cons of that to any length. But that does seem to be something that's rather unique here, which is in any other governmental system of education and what the people can and can't believe. I don't know that it's
but my point,
and the internet is an example of that.
But my point was that there is now a way to find thousands of people that will corroborate literally anything,
right,
at the tap of a mouse. So
yeah,
I'm not even, I'm not trying to condemn anything. I'm just saying that it does complicate things when there are stakes at understanding the truth.
Yeah, and I'm not cheerleading the idea that it's great that anybody can believe what they want just based on what they want to believe.
It complicates things when you're just versus, when you're the person standing in Central Park saying this or that versus you have a community of people. It's just different. Yeah. It's very different. And the internet has allowed this this kind of different type of fact finding.
Right. And the internet's birth was as science communication. So yeah, I don't know. Somebody who is that? I don't even know where I got this idea. It's a writer who wrote a book recently that was talking about Trump, and this is how this is the ultimate conclusion of what America in a way created, is people who can define everything around them based on their own terms of what they believe it to be.
You can believe it. But you
Panoramic,
can also
yes,
be
people should keep
wrong.
most of their opinions to themselves.
You can be wrong.
And I think that's something we need to get better at. I think people need to get better at being wrong. I think being wrong about something needs to carry less weight than it does now. I think that's that's one of the obstacles to progress and communication, is that people
I would argue that
agreed that they were wrong about something.
That 30 years ago, if you had a disagreement with someone, you'd talk about it. You'd have a debate. You'd bring up, things to try to support your argument. But we all have these computers in our back pockets. And so instead of having to think critically from what you have in your brain, you can very easily pull out your phone, Google a phrase, and get a support for literally anything. So it changes the way that we argue, it changes the way we debate, and it changes the way we are right or wrong. So I can be pointing at one source that says that cephalopods are aliens, and you can be pointing at another source that says that they're actually related to snails, and
if mine
we've reached a stalemate.
If mine is the journal Science and yours is Breitbart,
A stalemate.
But I don't care.
Like,
I don't care.
like
I have this phrase right here. I have a source.
Right. And I feel like I won, and you feel like you won.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's my point, is it's changed the way we debate things.
Yeah.
You can always be right.
But I mean, I guess it's a little bit of national pride that feeds into my desire to really look at the America this way, which is that, I get why there's so much ignorant belief in America. Because it comes with the freedom to seek out your own knowledge.
Yeah.
It's going to be, and I'm in comparison to any other nation on the planet, they're going to be as ignorant as they're told to be. We're
going to be as ignorant as we want to be. That's right.
Yeah.
That is exactly the difference.
And the fact that we might, beat the ignorant other nations on some issues just comes down to freedom is a hard thing to settle in my I don't want my people to be ignorant, like pride.
Freedom.
I'm
free to do what I want any old time.
You're free to buy probiotics that have not been tested based on their mechanisms. You're free. You can do it. You can spend all your money on it.
However, it's illegal to buy unpasteurized milk in some places.
You too can buy not a Dr. Jackson's poop pills.
It's Dr. Jackson. Dr. Justin's. Not a real doctor.
Not a real doctor. Poop pills.
It's in parentheses, though. So maybe he is a real doctor. You don't know because it's in parentheses, not a real doctor.
Parentheses. My parenthetical doctor. Doctor?
All right. Is it bedtime?
It is bedtime. We will see you all next week.
I do need a brief after at the after show combo, but yeah.
I'm glad we had a little after the after show.
No, I need an after the after.
You need an after the after show.
After the after show.
Okay. All right.
Secrets.
Hey, say goodnight, Blair.
Good night, Blair. Say goodnight, Justin.
Good night, Justin.
Good night, Kiki.
Dr. Kiki. We're not saying doctor. She's a doctor. She's a doctor. You're not going to say doctor. Let's try it again, Blair. One more time from the top.
Doctor.
Good night, Dr. Kiki.
Good night, Kiki.
Good night, Dr. Kiki. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Have fun on the interwebs. Not as much fun as Ted Cruz, though.